I never thought I'd be packing a bag at 3 a.m., walking away from the woman I loved for 25 years. But when I saw the truth, the betrayal, the lies, I realized the life I thought was mine had been slipping away for years, and I was the last to know. My name is Owen, and if someone had told me a month ago that I'd be packing a bag at 3 a.m., walking away from the life I built with my wife of 25 years, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, 49 years old, leaving behind the only woman I've ever loved, Honora. We met in college. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it, full of energy with just enough chaos to make life exciting. We dated for a few years before tying the knot, and for the longest time I believed we had it all. A strong partnership. 2 amazing kids. The kind of life most people would envy. But I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. It all started with our college alumni reunion. Every year the school puts on this big event, celebrating different graduating classes, 25, 30, 35 years since they walked across that stage. This year it was our turn. Honora had been looking forward to it for weeks, carefully choosing the perfect outfit, scrolling through Facebook to see which old friends might be there. When we arrived hand in hand, it was like stepping back in time. The old crew was there, and for a while, it was just laughter and nostalgia, like we were 20 again. And then he showed up. Rick. I should have known the night was about to take a turn the second I spotted him. Back in college, Rick had been relentless in his pursuit of Honora, the kind of guy who just couldn't take a hint. No matter how many times she turned him down, he kept trying. As far as I knew, she had never given in to his advances, but Rick? He never gave up. Even after we got married, the guy had the nerve to email her, claiming she had made a huge mistake choosing me over him. And now, 25 years later, there he was, strutting into the reunion like he owned the place. Like he owned the place. With a wide grin, he strolled up to us, arms outstretched like we were long-lost friends. Owen. Honora. Wow, look at you two, still going strong after all these years, he said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. Then he turned to Honora, flashing a smirk. You haven't aged a day. Honora offered a polite smile. Rick, it's been ages. How have you been? And just like that, the night started to unravel. Rick slid effortlessly into our group, acting like he belonged there, cracking jokes, charming his way into every conversation. At first, I played along, even throwing in a few jokes myself. But then I started noticing things. His eyes kept drifting toward Honora, not just in passing but in a way that wasn't exactly subtle. He wasn't just looking at her, he was watching her, studying her. At one point, while I was mid-conversation with an old friend, I caught him leaning in a little too close to her. She laughed at something he said and my stomach twisted. It wasn't quite jealousy, more like an instinct, that deep, unsettling feeling that something was off. After dinner, the music kicked in and everyone made their way to the dance floor. The band played throwback hits from our college days and Honora pulled me in for a slow dance. For a moment, it felt like old times. Her head resting on my shoulder, my arms wrapped around her, the rest of the world fading away. Then of course Rick had to show up. Mind if I cut in? He grinned like a kid who had just gotten away with something. I was ready to shut him down, to tell him exactly where he could shove his request. But before I could get a word out, Honora smiled. Of course. Owen won't mind. And just like that, she was in his arms. I stood there, frozen, watching as she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just a harmless dance, a friendly moment between old classmates. But deep down I knew better. That smile of hers, it wasn't the polite, dismissive one she used for casual acquaintances. It was different, warmer, softer. The kind of smile I used to see when she looked at me. When the song ended, I pulled her aside. What the hell was that? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. What do you mean? I let out a breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. You just let Rick waltz in like he's your prom date. You know how he felt about you back then, he never even tried to hide it. And now he's doing it again. She rolled her eyes. Owen, you're overreacting. He's just being friendly. It's been decades. Can we all just move on? I wanted to argue, to tell her that she was wrong, that this wasn't just some harmless reunion banter. But something in her tone made me hesitate. Sure, she sounded defensive, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Fine, I muttered. Let's just get through the night. But the uneasy feeling in my gut refused to settle. As the evening wore on, I kept catching glimpses of them together. Standing close. Talking. Sharing quiet laughs, like the rest of the party didn't even exist. I tried to distract myself, making conversation with old friends, forcing laughter at stories I barely heard. But no matter how hard I tried, my eyes kept drifting back to them. And every time it was the same. Honora leaning in. Rick whispering something. And that smile. The smile that used to be just for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, hoping the cool night air would clear my head, maybe shake this awful feeling in my gut. As the breeze hit my face, I exhaled, trying to ground myself. I leaned against the railing, staring into the darkness, telling myself I was overthinking things. It's nothing, I thought. Just old friends catching up. That's all. But then I saw them. Through the banquet hall's large windows, I caught a glimpse of Honora and Rick slipping out a side door. My heart dropped. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe they just needed some air too, I tried to reason. But before I could even process it, my feet were already moving. Keeping my distance, I followed. They walked across the college lawn, the same place where we had built so many memories during our years here. I hung back, watching, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I saw it. Rick leaned in, his hand brushing against hers. And she didn't pull away. Unbelievable. I muttered under my breath, my chest tightening. I turned away, heading back toward the building, my mind racing. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, to force her to explain what the hell was going on. But deep down, I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse Honora would come up with. Back inside, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much this was tearing me up. I kept my head down, sticking with friends who were too drunk or too lost in their own nostalgia to notice that anything was wrong. Eventually, Honora returned. She looked flustered, her hair slightly messy, her expression distant, almost guilty. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Sure," I replied, keeping my tone flat. This wasn't the time for a conversation. Not yet. I wanted to have it out with her right then and there, in front of everyone. To call her out, to make her explain herself, to watch her scramble for an excuse. But I didn't. The car ride home was silent. Honora stared out the window, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second that passed only made the anger build inside me, but I swallowed it down. The moment we walked through the front door, she went straight upstairs without a word. Meanwhile, I sank onto the couch, staring at the clock, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. I sat there for hours, replaying the night over and over in my head, wondering if this was the first time, or just the first time I'd caught her. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. When I looked up, she was standing there, her face pale, eyes swollen and red from crying. She hesitated for a moment before sitting beside me. Neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, tension crackling like a live wire. Then, in barely a whisper, she said, "I have to tell you something." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my heart hammering in my chest. She shifted uncomfortably, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "Owen," she started, her voice unsteady. "I don't even know where to start." I clenched my jaw. "How about with the truth?" My tone came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "That seems like a good place." She winced as if my words physically hurt her. For a second I thought she might back out, might try to brush it off or find a way to downplay it. But then she took a deep breath and met my eyes. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Tonight I let things go too far with Rick." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Too far?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "What does that mean, Honora?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "We kissed," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It didn't mean anything, Owen. I was just caught up in the moment. In the nostalgia." I shot up from the couch, unable to sit still, my body buzzing with adrenaline and disbelief. "It didn't mean anything?" I echoed, pacing the room. "You disappeared with the guy who's been obsessed with you for decades, and now you're telling me it didn't mean anything? Are you kidding me?" Honora broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm so sorry, Owen," she choked out. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I love you. Please, you have to believe me." I stopped pacing and just stared at her. This woman, the one I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, had betrayed me. And now she was crying, begging for forgiveness, as if that could somehow undo what she had done. I couldn't do this. Not now. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my coat. "Owen, please." "Don't wait up," I cut her off as I walked out the door. I drove for hours, aimlessly circling the city as my mind replayed every moment of the night over and over. I kept asking myself how we had ended up here. How had the woman I'd loved for 25 years ended up in another man's arms? Had I been blind to it all along? Had she? By the time I finally made it home, the sun was starting to rise. Honora was asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket like it was the only thing holding her together. I stood there for a long moment, watching her, searching for the woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew. But all I could see was Rick. His smug grin. The way she had looked at him on the dance floor. The way she had let him pull her in. And in that moment, I knew. Things would never be the same again. The next morning, dragging myself into the kitchen, running on nothing but caffeine and anger, I found Honora already there. She was sitting at the table, staring into her coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. She looked up as I entered, her face pale, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and guilt. "We need to talk," I said. I dropped into the chair across from her, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind still reeling. She looked up, her face pale, eyes swollen from crying. "I know," she whispered. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Why Honora?" My voice was tight, controlled. "Why Rick? Of all people, why him?" She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she toyed with her wedding ring. "It wasn't about him, Owen," she said softly. "I don't know. I feel like I've been stuck." "Stuck?" I repeated, my jaw tightening. "We've built a life together, Honora. A family, a home. How is that stuck?" Her head snapped up, and for the first time since last night, there was fire in her eyes. "That's just it, Owen," she snapped. "We are stuck. You're stuck. You're so comfortable in your little routine, work, dinner, TV, bed, and I'm just supposed to go along with it? Meanwhile, Rick's out there living his life. He's traveled the world, started businesses, done something exciting. And me? I feel like I've just been standing still, watching life pass me by." I stared at her, struggling to comprehend what I was hearing. "You're comparing me to Rick?" I said slowly, disbelief thick in my voice. "Rick? The guy who spent decades obsessing over a woman who didn't want him? That's your measure of success." Her face twisted with frustration. "At least he's not a loser, Owen," she shot back. "At least he has ambition. What have you done with your life, huh? What have we done? You're just coasting and I'm supposed to be okay with that?" Her words cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. "A loser?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. I repeated the word, my voice eerily quiet. "That's what you think of me?" She opened her mouth to respond, then shut it just as quickly, realizing too late that she had gone too far. "Owen, I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." My voice was cold, detached. "You meant every word." Pushing back my chair, I stood up, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "I hope Rick's ambition keeps you warm at night," I said bitterly. "Because I'm done being your punching bag." "Owen, wait," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean it. I was angry. Honora, you've made it very clear how you feel." I turned away before she could say anything else, before I let her see the way my hands were shaking. The next morning, I was still trying to make sense of everything when the phone rang. Honora flinched at the sound, her body tensing as she grabbed it quickly. That wasn't normal. Then I saw it, her face, usually so composed, tightening the second she glanced at the screen. Without a word, she rushed to the bedroom, pressing the phone to her ear, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but there was something different in the way she spoke. Something off. A feeling stirred inside me, a gut instinct I couldn't ignore. She paced the room for a moment before abruptly heading toward the bathroom. As soon as the door clicked shut, I moved. My heart pounded as I reached for her phone on the side table, unlocking it with shaky fingers. And there it was. A call from Rick. Again. I stared at the screen, anger and disbelief crashing over me like a wave. Rick. The same man who had spent years chipping away at my marriage. The one who had wormed his way into every crack of doubt and insecurity Honora had. I should have known it wasn't over. Rick wasn't just an old flame from college, he was a manipulator. Someone who had spent decades perfecting his tactics. Always lurking. Always waiting for the right moment. When I saw him at that reunion, I recognized it instantly, the calculated charm, the effortless way he inserted himself into our conversations, pretending it was all just innocent fun. But it was never just fun. It was a game to him. A long drawn-out game that he was determined to win. And the worst part? I could have fought back. I could have put my foot down the moment I saw him slithering his way back into Honora's life. I could have made it clear that I knew what he was doing. But I didn't. Because why should I fight for someone who was already running toward another man? She had made her choice. She was the one still answering his calls. Still meeting him in secret. And now she was about to walk straight into a trap, one I knew Rick had carefully laid out for her. But that was no longer my problem. She thought she could go to him and walk away unscathed. But I knew better. Rick didn't love her. He never had. To him, she was nothing more than a prize, a trophy to claim just so he could say he won. And I wasn't going to stick around to watch the fallout. I turned off my phone, blocked Honora on every platform, swore not to check my emails. For once in my life, I needed to disappear. But the silence didn't last long. 3 days in, my phone started buzzing nonstop with calls and messages. I ignored most of the calls and messages. But when I saw my son Stanley's name pop up on the screen, I couldn't bring myself to let it go to voicemail. I sighed and answered. "Hey son." "Dad," he said, his voice cautious. "Are you okay?" "Mom's freaking out. She said you just vanished. She's talking about calling the cops to report you missing." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "Of course she is." Stanley's voice came through again, firmer this time. "We deserve to know what's going on. Did something happen between you and Mom?" I hesitated. They were adults now, sure. But how much did they really need to know? Then I remembered Honora's words. The disdain in her voice. The way she had tried to make this my fault, as if I was the one who had ruined our marriage. The anger flared all over again. "Fine," I said, sharper than I intended. "You want to know? Your mother decided she needed something new in her life. And guess who it is?" I paused, swallowing down the bitterness before I said his name. "Rick. The same guy who's been circling her since college?" Silence. I could feel their confusion, their pain through the phone. "Listen," I continued, my voice heavy. "I didn't tell you this to hurt you. I just need you both to understand why I had to go." There was another long pause. Then Stanley spoke again, his voice more controlled now. "Okay, Dad, but what does this mean? What happens next?" I sighed. There was no way to sugarcoat it. "I need you both to do me a favor," I said. "Tell your mother not to look for me. She'll hear from my lawyer soon enough." Stanley's breath hitched. "Lawyer?" His voice rose slightly. "Dad, are you talking about divorce?" I closed my eyes. "Yeah," I said simply. "It's over, Stanley." In the background, I heard Emma start to cry. My chest tightened. But there was no taking it back. No fixing it. No pretending like things could ever go back to the way they were. Over the next few days, I met with a lawyer, going over our assets, our shared history, what needed to be done to divide it all. Signing those first few documents felt like crossing a line. And once I did, there was no turning back. I could never come back from this. I sent one final message to Honora, through the lawyer. "From now on, all communication goes through my attorney. Don't contact me directly." It was cold. But it was necessary. I wasn't ready to face her again. Maybe I never would be. 1 month later. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was small, sterile, one of those places where even the simplest legal matters felt unbearably heavy. The entire process was quick, clinical. We divided our assets, settled on financial terms. I got my share of the house's value. Honora got to keep the house itself, the furniture, the memories. I didn't want them anymore. Within an hour it was done. 25 years of marriage reduced to a few sheets of paper. As we left the courtroom, I lingered for a second, waiting, half expecting her to say something. She glanced at me just long enough for our eyes to meet. Her gaze was cold, distant. Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye. No closure. Nothing. And yet, her words still followed me. Loser. That single word echoed in my head every time I looked in the mirror. I tried to shake it off. To remind myself of everything I had actually accomplished. My career, my kids, the life I had built. But the anger wouldn't let go. Months later, Paris. It was a rainy afternoon when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. "Emma." I answered. "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad," she said, her voice warm but hesitant. "When are you coming back?" "Soon," I promised. "Why? What's up?" She hesitated. I want to see you. Can we meet when you're back?" Something in my chest softened. "Of course," I said. I had needed the time away to clear my head. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to go home. Emma met me at a cafe when I returned. She studied me carefully, stirring her drink. "And did it help?" I exhaled. "Did it?" I exhaled slowly, considering her question. "Did it help? Maybe. But some wounds didn't heal just because you changed your surroundings. I've hiked mountains, wandered through ancient cities, eaten things I can't even pronounce," I said with a small smirk. "It's been freeing." Emma smiled, but there was something behind her eyes, a hesitation like she was working up to something. "I'm glad you're doing okay," she said softly. "You deserve it." "And you?" I said, narrowing my eyes slightly. You clearly have something on your mind. She took a breath, still weighing her words. A while back, I overheard Mom talking to one of her friends, she admitted. They didn't know I was home. I wasn't trying to listen, but they were loud. My stomach twisted. And? She hesitated, then finally said it. She started dating Rick after the divorce. I froze, my coffee cup hovering midair. You're kidding? Emma shook her head. No. But it didn't last. She hesitated again, as if unsure whether to keep going. Apparently it was all just some little game to him. And then he ghosted her. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Rick had won. He had destroyed my marriage. Humiliated Honora. And then, once he got what he wanted, he walked away without a scratch. A bitter chuckle escaped me. That's something, I muttered, shaking my head. Emma reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. I know it's a lot to process, she said gently. I just thought you should know. I nodded, my mind spinning. Thanks for telling me, Em. That night, lying in my motel bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying it all in my head. Rick had been chasing Honora for decades. And the second he finally had her, she became worthless to him. And me? I was finally free. I replayed Emma's words over and over in my mind. For years I had blamed Rick. Blamed him for pushing his way into our marriage, for planting seeds of doubt in Honora's mind, for manipulating her into believing she was missing out on something more. But the truth was, he wasn't the real problem. Honora made her choices. She wasn't some naive girl who didn't know better. She was a 48-year-old woman who let herself be taken in by a fantasy. Rick may have struck the match, but Honora handed him the lighter. And now here we were, a broken family, a fractured home. And Honora? She was left with nothing except regret and the bitter realization that she had been played. Emma's birthday. The knot had been forming in my stomach all day. When I arrived at the restaurant, Honora was already there. Hi, I said carefully. She looked up, her tone soft, distant. Hi. She wasn't quite meeting my eyes. We spent the next few hours pretending, smiling for the guests, laughing at Emma's jokes, playing our roles. But underneath it all, the tension between us was thick. Heavy. Impossible to ignore. I reminded myself that today was about Emma. This wasn't the time to drag our mess back into the light. As the night wound down and the last guests left, Emma excused herself to her room, leaving us alone in the dimly lit dining area. Honora shifted awkwardly, glancing at me before speaking. Oh, can we talk? I sighed, rubbing my temples. Honora, I need to explain. Her voice was unsteady, her eyes pleading. I crossed my arms. Explain what? Yes, I was with Rick, she admitted quickly. But it wasn't what you think. I scoffed, shaking my head. Honora, don't do this. After you left, he started calling me. Constantly. She swallowed hard. At first I ignored it. But eventually, she looked down. I agreed to see him. A slow breath escaped me, my chest tightening. The fact that she had chosen to meet him, after everything, was betrayal enough. She hesitated before continuing. After the divorce? I thought, maybe there was something real there, Honora said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first it was nice. He was charming like he used to be. And for a moment I felt like I had control again. She paused, swallowing hard, her voice cracking. I couldn't just leave like that. I thought maybe there was something more. That I meant something to him. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. But I didn't. I was just a game to him. And once he got what he wanted, I didn't matter anymore. I stared at her, trying to process it all. And after that? I asked. No more calls? No more texts? She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. Nothing. He disappeared. Like I never even existed. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words settle over us. Once I would have tried to comfort her. To tell her she wasn't alone. That we could fix this. But not anymore. I wasn't here to fix her. Not anymore. I think it's time for me to go, I said, my voice steady. This isn't something I can fix. And I don't know if I even want to try anymore. Honora nodded, her face pale. I understand. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing for just a moment before stepping outside. Everything had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to let it. In the end, Rick won. And I didn't care. Let him have his twisted victory. Let Honora live with the weight of her choices. I was finally free. 1 year later. It's strange how life moves on even when you think it never will. A year ago, I was standing in the wreckage of my marriage, drowning in betrayal, loss, and the weight of everything I thought my life was supposed to be. I never imagined I'd be where I am now, not just surviving but living. I won't pretend it was easy. Those first few months were brutal. The silence, the loneliness, the habit of reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. But slowly things started to shift. The pain dulled. The anger faded. And for the first time in years I started thinking about my life, not as someone's husband, not as someone's father, but as me. I got my own place, a small house by the coast, nothing fancy but it's mine. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I had neglected, and took a few risks I never would have before. Then one day, out of nowhere, something happened. I woke up and didn't think about Honora. Didn't replay her words, didn't feel the sting of betrayal, didn't wonder if she regretted it. It was just another day. And for the first time in a long time I felt light. A message from the past. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and almost ignored it, until I saw the name. Honora. For a second I just stared at it. I had blocked her on everything after the divorce. This was a new number. Against my better judgment I opened the message. Owen, I know I don't deserve a response, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did but for the way I treated you. You were a good husband. I see that now. I hope you're happy. Truly. I read it twice. Then a third time. And then I deleted it. No response. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to hurt her. But because I didn't need to respond. I had moved on. And that was the best closure I could ever ask for. A fresh start. Time has a funny way of reshaping things. A year ago I thought my life had ended. Now I see it had only just begun. I won't lie, there are still moments when the past sneaks up on me. A familiar song playing on the radio. A scent that reminds me of home. A random thought about the years I spent with Honora. But those memories don't hurt anymore. They don't control me. They're just moments, pieces of a life I once lived. And now I have a new life. I left the city behind and moved to the coast full-time. Waking up to the sound of waves instead of traffic is a kind of peace I never knew I needed. I started writing again, not for work, not for anyone else, but just for me. And somewhere along the way I stopped feeling like I was running from something. I was just living. The unexpected encounter. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting at a small cafe by the water, sipping my coffee, lost in thought, when I heard a familiar voice. I turned. And there she was. Honora. She looked different. Older maybe. Tired. But mostly she looked small. Like the weight of everything she had done had finally caught up with her. For a brief moment our eyes met. And for the first time since it all fell apart I didn't feel anger. Or sadness. Or even regret. I just felt indifference. She hesitated, like she was deciding whether to say something. Maybe she had rehearsed an apology. Maybe she had things she needed to get off her chest. But I didn't care. I gave her a polite nod, nothing more, then turned back to my coffee. A few seconds later, I heard her footsteps fading into the distance. That was the last time I ever saw her. Moving forward. People always say healing takes time, but that's only part of it. Healing takes choice. I could have chosen to stay bitter. To let her betrayal define me. To spend my life angry at the past. But instead I chose me. And for the first time in a long, long time, I'm finally free. The end of one story, the beginning of another. Life has a way of surprising you. If you had told me a year ago that I would be here, truly at peace, unburdened by the past, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then I thought my story ended when my marriage did. That everything I had built, everything I had worked for, had been reduced to nothing. But now I realize, that wasn't the end. It was just the turning of a page. Honora became nothing more than a lesson, a painful one sure, but a necessary one. I learned that love isn't just about history or habit. It's about respect, about trust, about choosing each other every single day. And when someone stops choosing you, when they let their selfishness outweigh their commitment, you walk away. And you don't look back. A new beginning. These days my life is simple. Peaceful. I wake up to the sound of the ocean, I write because it brings me joy, and I spend time with people who truly care about me. My kids, my friends, even new faces I never would have let in before. And love? Well, I won't say I've found it again just yet. But I've found myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. For now. The end.